Vivian Marks had always taken pride in control. Her office was a fortress of order, where every paper, every meeting, every decision was a carefully coordinated step toward maintaining her status at the top of the corporate ladder. Today, however, that fortress seemed to be crumbling. As she strode through the glass doors of her office, her heels clicking with usual precision, the first signs of chaos greeted her like unwelcome guests. The once pristine desk was marred by a persistent leak, a slow drip of water from the ceiling pooling onto the polished surface, distorting the reflection of her meticulously arranged pens and notepads. A stack of files teetered precariously, one knocked over by a careless janitor's cart earlier that morning. Her phone, far from its usual dormant state, buzzed relentlessly with a series of unwelcome calls, a client pulling out, a project delayed, a budget slashed. Vivian's sharp bob, always perfectly in place, now seemed just slightly out of sync with her usual immaculate image. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders, but the tension was palpable. "This can't be happening," she muttered under her breath, eyes flicking to the ceiling as if willing the leak to stop. The irony was not lost on her after years of climbing, controlling, and conquering. Her life was unraveling in ways she couldn't explain. It was as if fate itself had decided to play a cruel joke. Outside the office, the world carried on indifferently. The hum of the city, the chatter of passers-by, the distant honk of a horn all seemed oblivious to the slow personal apocalypse in Vivian's life. Yet this unraveling was not just professional, it was deeply personal. The relentless series of mishaps forced her to confront vulnerabilities she had long buried beneath layers of ambition and armor. One afternoon, unable to bear the suffocating weight of her responsibilities, Vivian found herself wandering away from the skyscraper's shadows to a small city park. She sat on a weathered bench, watching children chase each other with carefree laughter, couples share quiet conversations, and strangers exchange smiles. The scene was a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms and polished conference tables she was used to. For the first time in a long while, Vivian allowed herself to simply observe, to be a part of the world, rather than its master. The sharp lines of her business suit softened in the dappled sunlight, and her gaze, usually so guarded, lingered on the simple joys around her. A child's delighted squeal as bubbles floated through the air, an elderly couple's gentle hand-holding, a dog's enthusiastic tail wagging. These moments, once trivial and unworthy of her attention, now stirred something unfamiliar and tender within her. Back at the bureau, janitor Joe hummed a cheerful tune as he moved quietly through the dimly lit halls, his worn overalls dusted with the day's work. His presence was almost invisible, yet his good-natured spirit and humble joy radiated warmth in the otherwise cold, grey offices. Joe's sudden streak of good fortune, an unexpected result of Millie's misfiled happiness, had brought small miracles into his life, a long-lost relative reaching out, a winning lottery ticket, a new friendship blossoming unexpectedly. His simple contentment stood in sharp contrast to Vivian's unraveling turmoil. Yet in the quiet moments their stories intertwined, a juxtaposition of fortune and misfortune, of humility and pride, of chaos and order. Vivian's transformation was neither immediate nor easy. At a small community event, a neighborhood gathering she would have once dismissed as beneath her, she found herself reluctantly accepting help, listening more than speaking, and opening herself to connections that transcended business and status. The sharpness in her eyes softened, replaced by a tentative hope. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble, revealing a woman capable of vulnerability and growth. Through the irony of her misfortune, Vivian discovered a new perspective, that control was an illusion, and that true strength sometimes lay in surrender and humility. It was a painful lesson, but one that promised a richer, more authentic life ahead. As the chapter closed, Vivian stood once more at her office window, gazing out not with the cold calculation of a corporate titan, but with the quiet introspection of someone beginning to understand the unpredictable dance of fate. Outside, the city pulsed with chance and change, and somewhere below, Joe's cheerful humming drifted upward, a reminder that kindness and joy often emerge in the most unexpected ways. And in that fragile moment between chaos and order, Vivian felt the first stirring of something new, hope. Elliot Crane was not a man given easily to sentiment. His office, a cluttered capsule of faded bureaucratic glory, smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to you like a stubborn shadow. Tonight, as he sat behind his scarred oak desk, the dim light of a single desk lamp cast long, twisting shadows that danced across the endless stacks of paperwork. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a monotonous soundtrack to his thoughts. As he puffed thoughtfully on his pipe, the smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, an accompaniment to his muttered sardonic commentary on the chaos unfolding in the bureau. Chaos, he grumbled under his breath, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. He had built his career on control, on order, on the meticulous precision of the bureau's endless files and protocols. The idea that some misplaced happiness could unravel the careful balance of fate was, to him, a ridiculous notion. Yet the ripples of Millie's era had stretched wider than even he could have anticipated. His thoughts were interrupted by a tentative knock at the door. Millie Harper, the nervous temp who had inadvertently set this entire fiasco in motion, peeked in shyly, clutching a folder to her chest. Her pastel cardigan was slightly askew, and her quirky glasses caught the light as she stepped inside. There was a vulnerability about her, an openness that contrasted sharply with Elliot's guarded exterior. "Mr. Crane," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've caused a lot of trouble, but I think maybe there's something good in all this chaos. Maybe kindness can come from mistakes." Elliot raised an eyebrow, his cynical instincts flaring. But as he looked at her earnest face, something softened within him, a faint crack in the armor of decades of bureaucratic cynicism. "Kindness from mistakes," he repeated, the words feeling foreign yet strangely compelling. "You really believe that?" Millie nodded, stepping fully into the room. "I do. Look at Joe the janitor. His life's changed in ways we never expected. Maybe the system isn't perfect, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." Elliot sighed, the weight of years pressing down on him. "I suppose even the most rigid clock can have a loose cog." Later that day, Elliot found himself lingering near the break room, a place he usually avoided. Janitor Joe was there, quietly chatting with Lena Park, the IT specialist who had been instrumental in tracking down the misfiled data. Joe's worn overalls and kind smile were a stark contrast to the sterile office environment, yet his presence was oddly comforting. Joe was sharing a simple story, a small act of kindness from a stranger, a door held open, a smile exchanged. The kind of moments that seemed insignificant in the grand machinery of fate, yet profoundly human. Elliot listened silently, his pipe unlit in his hand. A rare, genuine smile flickered across his lips as he absorbed Joe's tale. It was a moment of unexpected warmth, a crack in the armor of his habitual cynicism. As the day drew to a close, Elliot found himself standing by the office window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The cacophony of honking cars, distant chatter, and flickering neon signs painted a vibrant, unpredictable tapestry. He exhaled a slow breath, the smoke from his pipe curling upward like a tentative acceptance of the unknowable. In that quiet moment, he realized that perhaps the Bureau's rigid systems were not the ultimate arbiters of fate. Perhaps, within the chaos and error, there was something profoundly human, a kindness that could not be catalogued or controlled. Returning to his desk, Elliot picked up a file and glanced at it thoughtfully. The lines between order and chaos, control and chance, were blurrier than he had ever admitted. And maybe, just maybe, that was where the true magic of the Bureau lay. "Well, Millie," he murmured to himself, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's see what other surprises you've got in store for us." The shift was subtle but undeniable. Elliot Crane, once the embodiment of bureaucratic rigidity, was beginning to soften. The journey ahead promised to be unpredictable, and for the first time in a long while, he welcomed it. The conference room was stifling, its walls lined with dull beige of countless memos and procedural manuals, the air thick with the scent of old paper and brewing coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a clinical pallor over the gathered staff of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness. At the head of the long table stood Millie Harper, her pastel cardigan a quiet rebellion against the drabness, her quirky glasses catching the light as she adjusted them nervously. Today was different. Today, she would speak, not as the timid temp worker who had caused the chaos, but as a voice daring to embrace the messiness of fate itself. Millie cleared her throat, the room falling into an expectant hush. "I know we've always operated under the premise that fate is something we assign with precision, like files in a cabinet," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "But the misfiling has shown us something unexpected. Kindness, joy, and even hope can bloom from mistakes. Maybe it's time we reconsider what control really means. Maybe embracing some chaos isn't failure. Maybe it's a different kind of success." A murmur rippled through the room. Elliot Crane, seated to her right, leaned back in his chair, pipe in hand, his cynical eyes narrowing thoughtfully. The lines of skepticism etched deep on his face softened just a fraction. The usually sharp-witted clerk, known for his dry mutterings and resistance to change, found himself unexpectedly moved. The accident, chaotic as it was, had revealed a humanity in their work that he hadn't dared to acknowledge before. "Are you suggesting," Elliot said slowly, "that we abandon the very protocols that keep this place from descending into madness? That we turn a blind eye to order in favor of?" "What chance?" Millie met his gaze squarely. "Not abandon, but adapt. We can balance order with acceptance. We don't have to control everything down to the last detail to do our jobs well. Sometimes, letting go can bring about unexpected kindness." Harold Finch, the Bureau's manager, rose from his seat with a sharp rustle of papers. His face was stern, the flicker of disapproval unmistakable. "Control is our mandate," he intoned, voice firm and unwavering. "The system exists to prevent chaos, to ensure fairness and predictability. To entertain the notion that accidents might be beneficial is dangerous. It risks undermining everything we've built." As Harold paced the room, his footsteps measured and heavy, Millie noticed the long shadows cast by the harsh light's shadows that seemed to echo his rigidity. Yet, around the table, others exchanged glances, the weight of his words clashing with their own quiet observations of the recent upheaval. The janitor, Joe, stood quietly at the door, his warm smile and calm presence a grounding force amid the tension. His good fortune, born out of the misfiled happiness, was no secret now, a living testament to the unforeseen gifts hidden in error. Lena Park, the Bureau's specialist, nodded thoughtfully. "The system is designed to be inflexible," she said, "but maybe it's not infallible. Maybe it's time we consider a new protocol, one that allows for human unpredictability." The room seemed to breathe, the walls closing in less oppressively as the conversation shifted from confrontation to possibility. Millie felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a spark that had previously seemed impossible amidst the endless gray stacks of paperwork. "It's not about chaos for chaos's sake," she added softly. "It's about acknowledging that life's randomness can bring unexpected kindness. That sometimes, the mistakes we fear most might be the very things we need." Elliot chuckled dryly, the sound breaking the tension. "Well," he said, "if this Bureau is going to survive, it might need a little chaos after all." The debate stretched into the afternoon, a delicate dance between tradition and transformation. Millie's proposal didn't instantly overturn the old ways, but it planted a seed of possibility that the Bureau could evolve, embracing imperfection as part of its purpose. As the meeting adjourned, Millie caught Joe's eye. His smile, warm and genuine, was a silent affirmation of the new path ahead. Outside, the city thrummed with unpredictable life, and inside the Bureau, a subtle shift had begun, a quiet revolution sparked by error, kindness, and the courage to embrace the unknown. The dance between order and chaos was far from over, but for the first time, it felt less like a battle and more like a partnership. Millie stepped out of the conference room, her heart lighter, ready to face whatever came next with newfound confidence and a hopeful smile. And as the door clicked shut behind her, somewhere deep within the labyrinth of files and protocols, fate itself seemed to pause, curious, amused, and perhaps a little kinder than before. Millie stood at the center of the barrow of accidental happiness, the hum of fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over the scattered papers and flickering screens. Her pastel cardigan, slightly rumpled from a day of nervous pacing and frantic filing, was a small rebellion against the drab grayness of the office. Her quirky glasses caught the light just so, framing eyes that had once darted anxiously around the room, but now held a steady, determined gleam. "All right," Millie said, her voice firmer than anyone had heard all week. "We've seen what happens when we try to force the system into perfect order. It breaks. So this time we work with it." Elliot Crane, leaning against the edge of a desk cluttered with forms and coffee cups, let out a slow whistle, pipe clenched between his teeth. "You re-saying we embrace the chaos?" "Not exactly," Millie replied, tapping a finger against a printout of the happiness allocation logs. "We acknowledge the chaos, yes. But we also guide it. Fix what we must, accept what we should." Lena Park, seated at a terminal, swiveled her chair to face Millie. "That's unorthodox," she mused, fingers poised over the keyboard. "But after the glitches and loops we've seen, maybe it's the only way." Janitor Joe, standing quietly near the doorway, nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best plans come from a bit of luck mixed with a little mess." Millie smiled at Joe's simple wisdom. It was that very mess, after all, that had brought unexpected kindness into their rigid world. Together they began to map out a new strategy. Millie coordinated the team with a calm authority that surprised even herself. She delegated tasks. Elliot would monitor the procedural corrections, Lena would handle the technical adjustments, and Joe would keep an eye on the real-world effects of their decisions, offering grounded perspective from outside the usual bureaucratic bubble. The office buzzed with a renewed energy. Papers shuffled more purposefully. Screens glowed with data streams that felt less like cold commands and more like a living, breathing system capable of adaptation. At one point, Millie led the group through a maze of protocols and red tape that seemed designed to stifle creativity, yet she navigated it with a smile, turning rules into tools rather than shackles. Elliot, ever the cynic, muttered dry commentary under his breath, but followed her lead with a grudging respect. "I never thought it'd see the day when you'd take charge," he remarked during a brief lull. Millie laughed softly. "Neither did I. But sometimes you have to step into the chaos to find your footing." As the day wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The cold, grey walls of the bureau seemed to soften, illuminated by the human warmth of collaboration and shared purpose. Millie found herself less consumed by anxiety and more energized by the possibilities. During a quiet moment in the break room, Joe shared a simple insight about the happiness files, one that sparked a new angle for their approach. His words, humble and unassuming, reminded them all that kindness often came from the most unexpected places. By evening, as the city outside bathed in the golden hues of sunset, Millie stood by the window, gazing at the skyline. The system was far from perfect, but it was no longer a cold monolith. It was a dance, a delicate interplay between order and chaos, control and kindness. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she was ready. She had taken charge, not by erasing imperfection, but by embracing it, and in that acceptance, she found a quiet triumph. The Bureau of Accidental Happiness would never be the same, and neither would she. But the dance was just beginning. Tomorrow, Millie whispered to herself, we see where the music takes us. And with that, the office settled into a hopeful silence, the promise of change humming softly in the air. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the vast, dimly lit expanse of the bureau's main filing room, where the scent of aged paper and faint whiffs of stale coffee lingered like invisible ghosts. Here, beneath the unyielding gaze of countless filing cabinets, Millie Harper found herself at the heart of a peculiar and elaborate dance, a bureaucratic ballet choreographed by necessity and the strange demands of fate itself. Millie stood poised, her pastel cardigan slightly askew, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose as she faced the towering wall of cabinets that seemed to stretch into infinity. Almost hypnotically, her hands moved with practiced urgency, pulling folders and stamping papers, each motion deliberate but increasingly fluid, as if the rigid motions of bureaucracy had somehow evolved into something resembling grace. Alongside her, Elliot Crane shuffled through files, his rumpled suit a stark contrast to the precision of his movements. The pipe that rarely left his mouth was now forgotten on the desk, smoke curling lazily as he muttered dry commentary under his breath. "If fate's a dance," he said to Millie with a wry smile, "then we were all just trying not to step on each other's toes." Around them, the office buzzed with a strange rhythm. Lena Park sat at her console, fingers tapping out a staccato beat on the keyboard, her eyes darting between cascading lines of code and the glowing monitors that controlled the automated filing system. The soft electronic beeps and clicks blended seamlessly with the shuffle of papers and the stamping of forms, creating a soundtrack to the unfolding chaos. "System's less obedient than usual," she remarked, eyes narrowed, "but we'll coax it back in line." Nearby, janitor Joe swept methodically, his broom strokes falling in time with the office's frenetic tempo. His presence was a grounding force amid the manic energy, a reminder of the quiet hope that had blossomed unexpectedly in the wake of the misfiled happiness. His kind smile and gentle humming wove a comforting undercurrent through the tension, a subtle melody that contrasted with the mechanical clatter around him. The choreograph disorder took a sudden, sharp turn when Harold Finch stormed into the room, clipboard clutched tightly, his stern expression deepening. "Status report!" he barked, his voice slicing through the rhythm like a sudden drumbeat. The staff paused momentarily, the fragile flow disrupted, yet rather than collapse, the dance adapted. Millie shot him a quick, conciliatory glance and responded, "We rebalancing the files, Harold. Adjusting allocations to minimize disruption." Finch's frown softened, if only slightly. "Make sure it's by the book," he warned, stepping back into the shadows of the office. But as he retreated, the team resumed their movements, seamlessly weaving his orders into their routine. The chaos, it seemed, had become a carefully orchestrated performance. Each misstep anticipated, each correction an improvised step within the grand ballet. Throughout the day, the bureau's cold, gray interiors, once symbols of unyielding order, were transformed into a stage for this surreal spectacle. The employees' faces, usually marked by monotony and fatigue, now shone with a mix of determination and ironic amusement. Millie's initial nervousness had been replaced by a confident resolve, her fingers flying over files with newfound assurance. Elliot's cynical mutterings gave way to reluctant smiles, his sharp wit tempered by a dawning empathy for the unpredictable human elements intertwined with their work. The filing system, too, seemed to bend under the weight of human will and error. Automated mechanisms hesitated, protocols faltered, and the rigid machinery of control revealed its vulnerabilities. Yet in these cracks, warmth seeped through, the laughter shared over a misfiled document, the gentle encouragement exchanged when frustration threatened to overwhelm, the small acts of kindness that blossomed amid the absurdity. As evening approached, the office quieted but did not still. The dance persisted, slower now, more deliberate, a testament to the delicate balance struck between order and chaos. Millie paused at her desk, glancing around at her colleagues, Elliot meticulously arranging papers, Lena monitoring the system's reluctant compliance, Joe humming softly while wiping down desks, and even Harold Finch reviewing a checklist with an expression that hinted at grudging approval. In that moment, Millie realized that fate was not a rigid script, but a fluid performance. One shaped by the unpredictable steps of those who dared to lead and follow in equal measure. The Bureau of Accidental Happiness was not merely a place of cold precision. It was a crucible where error and kindness intertwined, crafting a narrative far richer than any protocol could dictate. And as the last files were filed, the last forms stamped, and the final notes logged, Millie smiled to herself, knowing that tomorrow's dance would bring new challenges, new rhythms to learn, and new opportunities to find grace in the chaos. After all, she thought, even in bureaucracy, there's room for a little improvisation. But just as she reached to turn off her desk lamp, a soft chime echoed from the filing system, a new anomaly waiting to be discovered. A fresh step in the endless ballot of fate and error. The dance was far from over. "Well," Elliot said, breaking the comfortable silence, "looks like the music never stops." Millie nodded, adjusting her glasses with a wry smile. "Good, because I think I'm finally ready to keep up." The office lights dimmed, shadows stretched, and somewhere deep within the endless filing cabinets, fate waited for its next move. The office was quieter than usual that morning, the air charged with a peculiar tension that felt less like dread and more like cautious anticipation. Millie sat at her cluttered desk, surrounded by a fortress of yellowing files and half-empty coffee cups, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of a stapler. Across from her, Elliot leaned back in his chair, pipe in hand, eyes narrowed beneath graying brows as he surveyed the disarray that had become their shared battleground. "You really think we can keep this, whatever it is, from unraveling further?" Elliot's voice was low, laced with skepticism but tinged with a hint of something softer, almost curiosity. Millie swallowed, adjusting her quirky glasses. "I don't just think it, I believe it. The chaos, the mistakes they've brought something real, something good. Joe's happiness, Vivian's humility, it's not just luck or tragedy anymore. It's kindness through error." Elliot exhaled a plume of pipe smoke, the curling tendrils drifting toward the flickering desk lamp. "You were proposing we embrace the chaos." Before Millie could answer, Lena Park's voice chimed in from the doorway. "If I may," she said, stepping in with the quiet confidence that came from countless hours wrangling the Bureau's labyrinthine filing system. "The data shows the system's already cracking under the strain of trying to enforce perfect order. The misfiling wasn't just a glitch, it's a symptom. Maybe what we need isn't to fix the error, but to learn from it." Millie looked up, eyes meeting Lena's steady gaze. "Exactly. We can't keep pretending the Bureau is infallible. We need a new approach, one that allows for flexibility." Elliot grunted, but there was less resistance in his stance now. "And what about Joe, the janitor who's suddenly the poster child for misplaced happiness?" Just then, Janitor Joe appeared in the doorway, his worn overalls dusted with the faintest shimmer of sunlight filtering through the office windows. His kind smile was genuine, a quiet beacon amid the sterile bureaucracy. "Morning," Joe said, nodding at the group. "I overheard a bit. If you were asking me, happiness is a funny thing. Sometimes it sneaks up where you least expect it. I'm just glad it landed here." His words stirred something in Elliot, a reluctant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Gathered around a whiteboard now crowded with diagrams, sticky notes, and hastily scribbled ideas, the unlikely alliance began to take shape. Millie, Elliot, Lena, and Joe exchanged dry humor and ironic observations, their voices weaving through the room like threads stitching a new tapestry of understanding. "So," Millie said, tapping a note labeled Selective Preservation, "instead of trying to erase every mistake, we protect the ones that bring genuine kindness." Lena nodded. "We tweak the system, add checkpoints that recognize positive anomalies rather than suppress them." Joe smiled softly. "And maybe, just maybe, we let a little chaos breathe in the cracks." Elliot sighed, the weight of decades of bureaucratic monotony lifting just slightly. "It's madness. But maybe the kind of madness we need." As they finalized their plan, the office seemed to shift around them. The cold, grey interiors no longer felt like a prison, but a stage for something unpredictable, something human. The hum of the filing machine softened, the endless stacks of papers seemed less oppressive, and the fragile dance between order and chaos took on new meaning. Outside the conference room, the murmur of the office carried hints of laughter and quiet conversations. Millie felt a surge of hope ripple through her, a feeling that perhaps, through their shared mistakes and unexpected alliances, they were crafting not just a fix for the Bureau, but a new philosophy. In the end, it wasn't about perfect control. It was about embracing the beautiful, ironic kindness that only human error could bring. And with that thought, Millie smiled, ready to face whatever the next misfiled happiness might bring. "You know," Elliot muttered as he lit his pipe, "this might be the most productive cows I've ever seen." Millie chuckled, adjusting her pastel cardigan. Don't get used to it. But deep down, she knew that things had changed forever. The Bureau was no longer just a machine dispensing fate, it was a living, breathing organism, flawed and beautiful, much like the people it touched. And that was a beginning worth embracing.